Buenos días, bienvenidos.
Good morning and welcome to this event organized by the representation of the European Commission in Madrid. In this gathering, we're going to talk about employment and we're going to look beyond. We're going to talk about the future of jobs and the capabilities, the skills needed in the framework of the green economy, the economy towards which we're transitioning and we need to continue to make progress. This gathering is within the framework of the Conference for the Future of Europe. It's an initiative launched by European institutions, launched on the 9th of May, the Day of Europe. How do we want the Europe of the future to be? How do we want citizens' relationships to interact with institutions? How do we want citizens to be part of the decision-making process? These are some of the many questions that this conference on the future of Europe wants to address. It's been started by the European institutions and it will take place through the spring of 2022 through multiple events. Institutions are encouraging all Europeans to participate. It's really open and they want the youth to be heard. Today we're going to talk we're going to hear the voices of some of those young people. We're going to talk about the European transition towards the green economy. And we have two guests who are very knowledgeable about this and they have great vision right now. Let me introduce them now. We have the Vice President of the European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, and he's leading interinstitutional relations and foresight at the European Commission. Good morning, Vice President. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much and good morning to everyone.
So this conference about the future of Europe is very much linked to the work of the Vice President and the work of his team, because they're thinking about the future, the foresight, and what's going to happen in the next 5 to 20 years. He's going to share about some of the scenarios that they are working on. And we also have the fourth Vice President of the Spanish government, Mrs. Teresa Ribera. She's the Ministry for the Green Transition and the Demographical Challenge. Vice President, good morning. Good morning. And very soon I will give them the floor to share some initial remarks. But first, let's do some housekeeping. We have an hour ahead of us. We're going to hear their remarks first, and then we will open the floor to the rest of the attendants via Zoom. They can ask their questions, they can share their experience and proposals via Zoom. Please remember to speak in Spanish. There is simultaneous interpretation into English, and you can also follow this conference via Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Just follow the hashtag if you want to. The future is yours. So once we're on the same page, and knowing that due to the pandemic, this meeting is taking place remote, I still believe that we're going to have a very close conversation. So, Mr. Šefčovič, you have the floor.
First, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and I'm always very happy when I can be back in Madrid. You have always nice weather, you have good atmosphere in your city, and what I always find here is a very strong drive toward the future, be it green, be it digital. And this morning I actually started my day with talking to the very progressive companies who would like to make Spain even greener, even more digital, even more modern, because they are working in electromobility, they are working in innovative solutions to produce and manufacture batteries here in Spain. And what I hear from them was more or less the same what I hear across the Europe, that we actually need high quality experts, people who would work in the area where there will be high value added created and where we will have excellent green jobs to offer to them. So I was indeed extremely appreciative that Spain is again pioneering here, because I was witnessing the signing of the memorandum of understanding with the European Battery Alliance Academy to train 150,000 people for this expertise by 2025. And what I immediately said in that meeting, so I just hope that we can copy that agreement, send it to other countries in the European Union, so we can follow your example and really invest in what is the most precious in Europe. And these are our people, this is our human capital, because this is how we make the difference in the world if it comes to tackling climate change. So I'm really excited that we can start the discussion on the future of Europe here on such an important topic. And I think, again, Spain is among the first countries where these discussions, debates are taking place. And once again, thank you very much for having me and for your kind invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm sure we're going to hear about a lot of questions, ideas, and remarks. Mrs. Vice President, your turn. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today listening to the ideas, proposals, questions that the youth have to ask us. And it's my pleasure also to share the screen with Vice President Šefčovič, because we must all highlight how privileged we are. Europe has understood how important it is to think about the challenges we want to face going forward. And one of the basic principles that, well, we've been hearing this for 20, 40 years already. Each generation needs to anticipate what will be the big challenges, the big risks that can materialize for the next generation, so that we can avoid those. We can mitigate the risk, reduce the obstacles, so that the next generation will enjoy the same opportunities we have. It's a bit complicated, but first we need to think about what we're talking about, right? Now, so there's something very important, and that's why this European Green Deal is very relevant. We need to think about the next generation of Europeans, and we need to blend in something that we had not done well. There are physical, chemical limits to our natural capital in our ecosystems, and we're misusing them. We use a lot more resources than what we actually have to create something that we thought was progress and productivity, but it isn't. We're actually undermining our opportunity to continue to move forward. We need to correct that, and that changes things radically. Also, from the point of view of employment and the way we produce things, in a country where 40% of the young people are unemployed, thinking about what we want to build and how the institutions can make this a bit easier is absolutely essential. So I will make 3 remarks about this. First, how does our training and educational system work? For many, it's going to be an ongoing, lifelong learning system. We will have to constantly adapt to new environments. And then how does this integrate into the job market? How can we create a new way of producing, a new industry that takes into account the environmental angle? And how can we make this work? It's true that the weather is super nice right now, but it can actually get quite dry if we get to 40 degrees or 45 degrees and droughts, and that would be terrible for agriculture in our country. That can bring on huge challenges in terms of employment. It can also have huge impact on tourism and many other industries. So transforming the types of jobs and the economy cuts across all industries, and we're just very fortunate to share our vision in Europe. Okay, so you've given your initial remarks. I'm going to open the conversation now to the rest of attendants on Zoom. As I said, these young people are very knowledgeable. They have deep knowledge of Europe, and they also have, well, they use their critical thinking skills, and they participate through universities and associations. Some of them will be asking you questions. Others will be sharing their experience and their proposals in the framework of this conference regarding the future of Europe. Now, actually, let me start with two young entrepreneurs who are going to share their experience and their proposals. Maitane Alonso, she is a young researcher. She's a medical student at the University of the Basque Country, and she's created a machine and she's going to tell us her experience and her proposals. Good morning. First, I wanted to thank you. It really is an honor to be here today sharing with you. And yes, my name is Maitane Alonso. I'm a researcher, and I started researching 5 years ago, which is very little time in research, but it's a fourth of my lifetime. I really haven't really done anything else. I started researching because of my father. There's 5 of us at home, but my father would always cook as if there were 20 people eating every night at home. And I'm sure this happens in many other homes. We had so much leftovers that we were eating hamburgers for breakfast one day because he always cooked so much. I started researching and I said, this can't be. And I learned that we discard 1/3 of the food around the world every day, which is quite a big problem, particularly if you take into account hunger in the world. And I realized it's not just my dad. I realized it's a global problem because we all know that food is discarded and wasted. And we also know that there are limited resources to produce them, such as water or the land. So, and the grounds for sustainability going forward must take into account 2 pillars. First, education, and second, research. I've come to the conclusion that we all have a researcher inside us, and I wanted to share this with you because of the following. My 9-year-old sister, she's always trying to create and build. She's asking questions tirelessly and asking the why of everything. But as we grow old, there are certain limits established. There's a certain way of doing things, and we are no longer enthusiastic about building a new future for all of society. And that's quite alarming. How are we going to build a better and more sustainable future if we don't change the way we do things? I remember when I was at school, when I was younger, and we would learn about sustainability. Sustainability is much more than a theory. It's a lifestyle. And sometimes we think about it as that word. We all know about the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. But, well, it's actually quite simple for me. At home, when one of my toys would break up, I wouldn't get a new one immediately, but rather with the one broken toy and another broken toy, we would build something that made sense. And you wouldn't realize back then, but still, that is a pillar of sustainability, which, as I said, is a lifestyle. We live very quickly. We're always thinking about a better future. We want to contribute our 2 pence. But I think it's really important to stop and try new things. So from my point of view, in order to build a better and more sustainable future for all of society, we need to take into account several pillars. Education, as I mentioned, and also visibility of a great problem, this climate crisis that we are living. We don't have a planet B, at least for now, and it's everybody's responsibility to take care of our planet. Stewardship. And when we talk about the problem, well, sometimes one may think it doesn't even exist because we don't talk about enough. And this is in type of initiative is key to raise awareness with all age groups. And then support is key. We talk about lack of initiative often, but I've seen many people with incredible projects and potential to have positive impact on society, and we need a real commitment to go forward. Stop thinking that we have small ideas that are not going to work, that we cannot undertake, because when we have an idea that we believe can have positive impact on society, the actual question is, how can you leave that just in a drawer? So thank you very much for opening up this conversation. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Maitane, for sharing your experience and your proposals. Now, the second young person is going to share his experience. He's also a young entrepreneur, and he loves research. Eduardo Gracia. He's the founder of a startup where they design furniture that can generate electricity from the sun. Hello, good morning. Thank you once again. It's an honor to be here. My name is Eduardo Gracia. I'm an engineering and I'm doing the Masters of Economics, Leadership and Innovation. And I'm an entrepreneur. I have 3 projects ongoing, and one of them is the one that you just mentioned. I want to start with a quote by Mark Twain. There are 3 important, the most important days of a person is when a person is born and the person dies. Well, a few years ago, I was sent to an electricity station to do a dummy, and I would see that the light would turn on. And I discovered right then that my purpose in life would be that I design other products later on. And then during my college, I went into engineering. And I saw that the contents of the first 2 years was very theoretical. It wasn't connected to current technologies. It wasn't connected to the problems of the world. So I decided to try out new subject matters to do projects beyond engineering. So I started designing things with solar panels. I started designing an wind turbine, or many other projects. And I started a program of the Polytechnic University in Madrid on a startup incubator, and that's where I launched my company, furniture that creates electricity from the sun. A table would create electricity to charge mobile devices and also shed light. And I understood right then that the objectives of the program need to be aligned with sustainable development goals, and that's not really at the core. However, it is a key, and it's something that must always be present. And I know that there are youth in Colombia, China, and other countries doing the same. And so I started to do my 2 pence here in Spain, in Madrid, and I received support from the local government. And then I have another startup trying to solve other problems. We know that there are lots of plastic in oceans, and every time a garment is sold, there is a lot of waste created. What can we do to create these type of projects so that more young people join our efforts? Education is going to be key. Education needs to be strong in values, multidisciplinary. It must be student-centered, and it really needs to do with this encouragement rather than publications. We need to give opportunities to everyone. I'm not just talking about scholarly education. I'm talking about empowerment, critical thinking, discussing, doing away with biases and old beliefs. And that has been actually useful to solve the problems of the century. We're talking about hunger, inequality, climate change, pollution. Those are some of the big challenges that we have. And Pope Francisco mentioned that curbing CO2 emissions requires this type of efforts, particularly in more polluting countries such as the European Union. If there is something positive coming out of all these past months, well, we know that we're very vulnerable and that life is changed. Jean Monnet, the architect of the European Union, predicted that Europe would be fortunate in this crisis. And I believe that the EU Next Gen funds have shown leadership for this. And we're talking about CO2 neutrality by 2050. What do we need to do then? In order to boost these, we need to invest in innovation on one side. We need to invest and encourage understanding and creating sustainable models, because it will be good for everyone, for our health, our ecosystems, and for the economic development of our countries. And third, education. That's the key. Now more than ever, we need to grow in the face of adversity. We need to create a more positive and sustainable world. And that's where the green jobs and the committed entrepreneurs will play a role, together with the European Union, with good regulatory frameworks and supporting education and the stewardship and respect of the planet from a very early age. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Vice President, these two young entrepreneurs have raised the bar quite a bit. They have quite some expertise under their belts. There's a common denominator to their proposals. They both talk about education. Now, what would you say to them? What's the progress that the European Union needs to do? Mr. Šefčovič, please go first.
Thank you very much. At first, I really would like to thank Maitani to remind us that, as I see, all moms and dads in Europe are the same. So when I come home to my mom for breakfast, it's exactly the same experience. And I'm glad to see that indeed everywhere in Europe it's similar. But I totally agree with you that, and also with the point that Eduardo was making in a conclusion that to get to the climate neutrality, to be really responsible in tackling climate change, of course, we need all technology on board, but it's quite clear that without behavioral change, with a new approach to our life, to our consumption routine, to our way of life, simply this will not happen. And honestly, in this, Europe has to play absolutely crucial role, because I do not know any other major economy where the tackling the climate change has such a strong public support like in Europe, and especially coming from you, from the young generation, which is so encouraging. And I think the point of education is indeed the key. I think all across the EU, I think we have to think again how to adjust the curriculum from the, I would say, the primary school through the high schools to the universities. And I think the critical thinking Eduardo mentioned is it's, I think, very important, and not only in how we approach the subjects, the history, but lots of, I would say, hoaxes which are published every single day on the internet, and we see that they have very strong manipulative effect on big parts of our society. So critical thinking, verifying the facts, being, I mean, really hungry for the facts and for the truth is very important. And to just underline the point of Eduardo and Maitani, to bring some hard figures here. When you talk to the employers, the labor market, so you hear that 40% of them have actually the problem to find the skill sets, the knowledge they need in this new type of economy, which is now being developing. That 100 million people in Europe is actually working in another area that they've been prepared for or they study for. So we have very clearly the skills match. And therefore, I think that the discussion which was held in Porto just a couple of days ago in the framework of the social summit had put very clear marker that we need to make sure that 60% of adult population in Europe would have a chance for, I would say, permanent update of the skills, reskilling, and access to the educational and vocational programs, which would help to make sure that our people are well prepared for these huge transformations which we are going through. And the last word on curriculum, I think if you look at the universities which have, I would say, the best results in making sure that they students, the graduates get actually the top jobs in the European economy are usually the universities which match the theoretical education with already practical experience. Very often researchers, PhD students are working already in research teams or in some innovative companies or in concrete factories on the problem, so they would see how the theoretical knowledge is actually used in practical day-to-day activities. So all these are, I would say, the lessons we have to not only realize, but also embrace and introduce, because as I said at the beginning, the human capital is the most precious what we have. We have very thriving, very dynamic and energetic young generation, and we just have to make sure that we'll create the condition for them to strive even more and to have proper skills for this demanding 21st century.
What is your answer, Mrs. Vice President? Well, I have enjoyed their remarks, and I very much agree with Mr. Vice President's remarks as well. I believe there's a behavioral change and new values that are quite significant. And I think that over the last few months, during this very intense crisis, we've thought and reconsidered our priorities, comfort and health within our homes and families, going back to the outdoors. All of those are really important. We used to take them for granted, and because of this crisis, now we realize how important they are. And then education, lifelong education or training with a lot more flexibility, we realize how important that is. And then this new education connects with the new values, where we have critical thinking. Everybody wants to be engaged. And it's not only an educational system, this society has favored the silos and the individual visions, and it has forgotten how many interconnections there are between all areas of reality. We need to get that back. We need to realize that all this crisscrossing is there. But I would pick up on two more remarks. First, institutions have a responsibility, and when they act, things can change. We are living times of rapid change. The volition, will of people to participate in the decision making regarding their future has changed compared to other times when there was more of a prescribing effect. So there's a clear interdependence between institutions and society. And we need to use this differently. We need to find the way, I think Eduardo mentioned this, we need to find the frameworks that will enable using all of this imagination, commitment, engagement that we have flowing from citizens. We need to agree on the big goals and principles, and then we need to enable this creatively and meaningfully. And I think that's a great challenge for institutions as well. We're not used to working this way. And however, it is key because this interdependence between citizens and institutions cannot just take place if we vote once every 5 years, or when decisions are made in isolation without this constant dialogue with different stakeholders in society about how to correct and enable and facilitate. So this long-term reflection, imagining the scenarios to build our long-term future, is really important. Of course, the outcome won't be perfect, I'm sure of that, but this is going to help us identify opportunities where we can continue to work. It will help us identify hurdles to avoid, and it will help us correct our direction through the journey. So yes, we need lifelong learning. Yes, we need the experience and the interconnectedness and the constant dialogue between citizens and institutions with imagination and with being brave. Yes, we need to understand that values change, and we need to embrace the environmental limits and the social concerns. And yes, we need to learn to work a lot more effectively and with a lot more respect between institutions and citizens. We depend from each other. Of course, there are different responsibilities and different roles to play, but if we agree on where we want to go and how to have this constant dialogue to work together, it's much easier to share responsibility, contributions, and creativity. Okay, let's continue with this ongoing dialogue. These two young people have shared proposals and their experience, and now they have a lot of questions. Let's move on now to Jean Valeria and Ignacio Cortés. They have some questions for you. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Vice President, and good morning, Mrs. Vice President. The youth are very much interested in the future of green jobs, and we would like to know what measures the European Commission will propose to guarantee there are high quality green jobs in the future. Thank you. Okay, Ignacy, maybe go ahead with your question and then they will address them both. Thank you to both of you for your time, and good morning. I would like to take a step back and look at the financing and macroeconomics angle of this, because there's going to be substantially more financial investment for the green transition, because it's just needed. Would the Stability and Growth Pact rules be reviewed in these circumstances? Okay, quality jobs and how to finance the public deficit. This word always looming over European policy. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. I see that we are indeed talking with very well informed young people, and I very much appreciate it. The answer to Gina on the high quality green jobs. I think here there are, of course, several strands which we have to follow. The first, we have to make sure that it's actually green and digital transition and the transformation of the economy will continue at least at this pace. I mean, in a couple of weeks, we are going to propose a very important package. It's called Fit for 55. It means that we would like to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 55% already in the year 2030. And it's quite an upgrade because when we've been signing up to the commitments in Paris, there we pledged that we would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 only by 40%. So it's quite a jump to make. And I think it would clearly lead to the more innovations, more green companies, for sustainability programs in all big corporations. And of course, they need the high quality people. So today, if you want to be guaranteed that you will have a good job, so if you specialized in any field which is linked with the technologies or with the area, because they also need, for example, good lawyers, good social scientists, experts to discuss and prepare these behavioral changes. So it's clearly in the sector of green or digital transformation. So that's, I think, very important to say. Currently, as I said, there is a huge demand for these professions, and I hear it in every single meeting I have with entrepreneurs or the companies across the Europe. But I think it's, of course, very important is to use these funds Ignacio was referring to in the most, I would say, useful manner. And here Spain is working very hard on the recovery and resilience plan. And I think the European solidarity here was clearly demonstrated by the fact that Spain would be the major beneficiary, almost 70 billion euros on top of the usual funding will come to Spain. And what is very encouraging to see that Spain is very serious about investing more than what Commission was proposing into the green and digital transition. So we've been suggesting 37% for green, 20% of digital, and in Spain, both of these targets have been exceeded. And I know that for training and for preparing the new generation for the challenges of this new labor market, Spain is allocating, I think, around 6 billion euros. So these are quite significant sums of money, which I believe will help to adjust the educational system, to prepare the training programs for these new skills required at the market. And Ignacio is very knowledgeable about how the macro economics is being managed in the European Union. And there, of course, I think we all have to remember the harsh lessons of austerity after the financial crisis we had here a few years ago. And I think nobody wants to repeat that mistake. And therefore, also, you would hear from my colleagues like Paolo Gentiloni, who is responsible for this area, and he's a former Italian prime minister, so he has a lot of practical experience with facing the difficulties of that crisis. It says that we, of course, have to look at the Growth and Stability Pact with these new optics, with this new knowledge, and now we have to focus on how to kickstart our economies and start to kind of focus on all the other macroeconomic figures once we would reach at least the level of growth which been here before the COVID-19 crisis, because we know what kind of implications this crisis had on tourism, on unemployment, on overall, I would say, social, and sometimes I would say even psychological impact on our society. So we have to cope with it aftermath, with the consequences. We have to restart the economy. We have to bring, I would say, the energy back to the society after these very difficult lockdowns, which we all went through all over the Europe. And once we are at the levels of performance before the crisis, then I think we will have very thorough debate how, of course, to be very responsible in public financing, but not to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Vicepresidenta, ¿nos puede dar quizás usted la visión?
Mrs. Vice President, do you have the Spanish take on the questions asked by our two young colleagues? I would add two comments. First, we must be extremely responsible in how we manage our resources. And that's why we need to invest, to transform, and enable something that will last longer, will create prosperity, jobs, and free up resources at the same time, so that we can pay attention to the social, make sure that there is not an excessive concentration of wealth in certain groups and we forget about others. Then we need to look at macro level, but also we need to see how this prosperity, this wealth is distributed among all. And if you invest well, you are freeing up resources for more education, more innovation, more solidarity, and to correct mistakes. And my second remark, talking about, well, the lessons learned from past, I think my tennis example and the breakfast is really good. What does it mean? So that we don't waste, we're not going to eat? Of course, that doesn't make sense. We just need to eat healthy and think about the added value of what we eat and use the resources that we need, no more, no less. And I believe Europe has understood very well the great lessons. Some decisions might be correct on paper from a macro optic, but they have terrible consequences for individual people and society. Nobody's going to spend and there are no jobs out there. Well, I'm sure there will be a nominal adjustment to the accounts, but it doesn't make any economic sense. It brings down the system and it has huge social democratic impact because it can question the credibility of institutions. We are supposed to be organized for everybody's benefit. And I believe Europe has learned that lesson. We've gone through some dire times as a consequence of the response given to the crisis back in the day. And well, let's invest in what makes sense now to be ready for the future. That's been the response. Let's enable future growth right now, so that we can activate this recovery and not just to go back to the old days, but to build something new and better. Okay, there are some more questions that we're getting through social media. There is one question for each of you. For Mr. Šefčovič, Mr. Vice President Šefčovič, you gave a few ideas before, but they want you to be more specific. We see that the youth are prepared, but Isabel del Rio is asking, how will European funds help create green jobs and green skills specifically? And then to Mrs. Vice President, regarding the Spanish job market and the European job market too, are they prepared for the green transition? And she quotes the car industry, which is so important for Spain. The funds first, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much for this question, and I understand how pressing this is. I think I can combine the two questions, and I'm sure that Madam Vice President will complement my answer. I would say the concrete example I would use is I would say, the approach which we have seen, I would say, this morning. As I said, we are creating completely new industry, electromobility, battery production, not only for the cars, but for storing the renewable energy, which you have so abundant because you made the right decisions in the past to go for renewable green energy. But of course, you not always have a sun, you not always have a wind, you not always have the same flow of water. And therefore, when you have too much of it, you have to store it for the times where, let's say, the renewable energy inflows will not be at the same level. And for that, we need to learn how to store energy better. And it's very complicated and complex process which nobody mastered to the full satisfaction yet. And we are in the process of developing the best possible technologies. And for that, you need experts, you need the skills, you need appropriate knowledge. And as I said, we have 100 million people in Europe who would need to be retrained or who need to update the skills. And how to do it in a concrete manner. We've been discussing about the universities, about the vocational training, which again can be funded by the European funds. Of the young people are properly prepared for this already during their studies. Or we can do this upgrade, which we have seen this morning, where European Battery Alliance Academy launched the program to train just by 2025 150,000 people with the proper skills for this sector. And I can guarantee you that everyone who will pass the academy will be very much sought in the labor market, because the companies are lacking this type of expertise. So I think this is a very concrete example, because I think 150,000, it's quite remarkable number, and it's just one sector, one industry, and it just shows that what kind of demand, what kind of interest there is in the well-trained people. And again, this will be, I'm sure, a great cooperation between the Spanish government, the European Commission, which will be funded jointly. And I think that the major beneficiaries would be the young people who are properly trained. But I would say the overall, the Spanish industry, and I would say transformation and transition which these well-trained people and this new technology will bring to Europe and to the world.
May I? Yes. I believe that car and mobility are two very interesting concepts, because many of the things we've mentioned can be applied to them. On one side, we have a behavioral change. We have people who want to bike or walk, and they want cleaner air in cities. And we want to get back some space that up until now is occupied by cars, which, by the way, are parked most of the day. And that's not very reasonable. And then the industry and jobs around cars and motorbikes and buses are huge, and there is a social demand for mobility, not only for commuting purposes, but also for the mid-range and the long range. Now, we also know that the type of business and industry associated to this industry is changing. Most likely, we will move towards an industry where the weight of owning a vehicle will be less than having access to mobility options. We see this with leasing and car sharing. And we know that for a great extent, for environmental reasons, as much as possible, the transportation of freight and people in long distance will have to change. We also know that because of the weight of the car assembly industry, well, we know that they need to take a leap forward. We need to identify business opportunities, job options, innovation, and we cannot be distracted and left behind by a model that will come to an end. I think that companies are thinking about this. We know that there are other connections. Those batteries, that energy storage will be useful for other things, not just for cars, as the Mr. Vice President mentioned. The fact, for example, that for the greatest part, most of the industrial transformation is really important because what we produce is exported, and there is a change in what we export in the demand from other countries. And I would add to that something that's actually quite important. We take Europe for granted, but it's important to remember every day that we need to build Europe every day. Europe is starting to identify the innovations with highest value added so that our industries continue to have significant relative weight in a world where increasingly, well, fortunately, we see more citizens and countries that demand and produce. Back in the old days, it was just the Western world producing and demanding. That is no longer so. The world is more complex. All inhabitants of the world are aspiring to some comfort, and we need to see how we do that. The car industry sees this and is trying to change. And for us in Spain, it's really important to encompass that transformation and make sure that we have the best professional skills, the best abilities to adapt and innovate, and make sure we're not lagging behind or missing this change, because change is happening and demands are different, and they're increasingly integrated in a vision where environment plays a key role. Okay. Time is of the essence and the clock is ticking. We have time for one more question. Luis Gonzalez, please. Hello, good afternoon. I'm a citizen and I live in one of the regions considered as, well, among the least developed within the European Union. And I want to ask, how are the institutions considering the training of workers in rural areas so that the green jobs don't enhance or make worse the problem of people living in rural areas? Mr. Vice President? Should I do it? Yeah, okay. Should I rephrase the question? The Mrs. Vice President maybe didn't understand very well. No, maybe I can speak first, and that way Mr. Vice President will give us the final remarks on the idea of Europe. Okay, so this is happening in other countries. I don't know to what extent this is the case, but in Spain, at least, the division of wealth is huge. There is a great concentration of wealth and income in specific cities, and it's a lot. Well, and the population is aging and diminishing in rural areas where there are less industries in urban development, and there's been a huge cultural change taking place there. Spaniards know this cannot be, this type of imbalance cannot be, and we have capabilities, resources we didn't have before, and we need to leverage them thanks to digital connectivity, thanks to the fact that we don't have to be physically present, thanks to the fact that industrial developments can be decentralized, or that we can support entrepreneurship and breach that gap between this wealth concentration in some areas that leave out of the wealth many other areas of Spain. We need to redo many of these. So, and I think that cuts across many of the things that we've mentioned: lifelong education, access to digitalization for this lifelong learning and for other purposes, and supporting entrepreneurship, and then specific measures that will help with other activities and will help support the primary industry. Now, this requires constant effort. The European Union, not just us, I know that this problem might be dire here than elsewhere, but the European Union is knowledgeable about this, and there is a commissioner that works on these matters, because we know it has huge impact on democracy and the access to opportunities and to the distribution of resources that help us make access to services equal. We still have a lot to do, but we need to combine all the measures and the support of all institutions. From my point of view, social awareness and social demand for this to happen is really complicated, but we have that. Society wants to solve this now. Of course, it's going to take time. It has to be a soft, constant effort, and sometimes we'll have to mobilize resources. But like I say, it has to be, we have to be in this for the long run, and knowing that the type of economy and production level that's a lot more balanced, environmentally speaking, it's a lot more digital, that will help us in this transition. Mr. Šefčovič, please.
Thank you very much also for this question, which is kind of underlying something which has become megatrend over the last decades, so that the concentration of the people in metropolitan area. And when we look through different statistics, and when we look through our Foresight studies, so the tendency indeed was in Europe that by 2050 we might have around 80% of our population living in the big agglomerations. And of course, it was not healthy, it was not good. Paradoxically, the COVID-19 crisis kind of slowed down or even reversed this process, because people realized how good it is to have a garden, how important the nature is. And therefore, I think that we will see kind of slight reversal of this trend. But how to make sure that this is something which would continue is to create the conditions for the people who are living in the rural areas, that they would see the fact that they are living there as a big advantage, that they are breathing the clean air, that they are living in the middle of the nature, in a more quieter environment, where it's much easier to bring up children. But for that, you have to have proper conditions. You have to have good jobs, job security. You have to have, of course, access to the internet. The infrastructure has to be in place. And of course, the expectation is that also jobs would be the jobs where you create high value, and where they are also linked with that modernity, which always attracts the young people. And if you look at all jobs, which are existing right now, you were realizing that many of them didn't exist just 5 or 10 years ago, like mobile application developers for the banking institutions, or the smart farmers using the drones for making sure that the crops are properly watered, or simply inspecting the production in the sites which are very, very distant. And therefore, I think that what is very important here is to realize how important the equilibrium, the balance is also between the, I would say, metropolitan and rural agglomerations, and how even today the policy which we called cohesion policy in the European Union is strengthened and supported, because this is how we want at first to tackle the disparities in income, in well-being, in the quality of life between rural and metropolitan population. And I think that today, with all these modern technologies and these, I would say, overall modernization, I think that we can secure for the people in the rural area even high quality of life than you very often have in overcrowded metropolitan areas in all our member states. So I think that here, of course, the political support, financial support, but also the discussion with the grassroots people who are living in these communities is very important, because they will tell you in the best possible way what we need, what needs to be improved, what kind of support would be required to make the life better and easier in these rural areas. And I think that it's a common task for all of us on all levels of governance, and especially of the the citizens from these areas to tell us how can we be of the best of help. So I think this would be, I think, the best approach. I just want to underline that that's really on the agenda, I think, since actually the Spain joined the European Union. It's still a challenge also for all the new member states which came after Spain, and still very, very important part of the European Union policies.
Bueno, lamentablemente no tenemos tiempo.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. We are coming to the end of this conversation about the future of employment in the framework of the green economy. We only have 2 minutes left for our guests to summarize this conversation. Mrs. Vice President, please go first. The most important conclusion I reach is that we need to use these channels. We need each and every one of you to be engaged in the things that we're building. And I know that sometimes it's hard because our organizations might be more or less established. And then who's going to represent the youth? That is not that easy. So we need to work in educational spaces where one might think it's easier to find them, and vocational training and universities. But when we start digging into the problem, we realize of something that you said. When you're 10, when you're 20, or when you're 50 or 80, your take on life is different. Our responsibility is to enable the future while balancing all of these interests, and we need you to contribute and be interested, all of you, for those who are temporary, the stewards of those responsibilities. So we need more discussions about specific things or with macro outlooks as the one that we have enjoyed today. Mr. Vice President Šefčovič, please, your conclusions.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, Elena, I would like to really thank you for excellent moderating, and all the young people for their attention, their interest, their support, and the energy which they are bringing to today's world. Because I think this generation can clearly say, and it's not that often that we are really living in the historic times. I mean, the transformation the whole world and our societies will undergo in the next decades is unprecedented. And the young generation, I think, without over-exaggerating my statement, will really have maybe the destiny of the mankind in their hands. Will we make sure that our planet is livable for the other generation? Will we be able to raise up to the challenge to all these behavioral changes which we know are necessary? Will the Europe be able to continue to be the role models for other countries and other major economies, and show that solidarity with the developing countries as we've been doing until now? All these are indeed the questions and the challenges of historic magnitude. And I think how to best be prepared for that is that we have to invest, as we said, both with Madam Vice President several times, in the young people, in them being well prepared, being motivated, in making sure that they will have possibility to transform their inner energy, the motivation, support for sustainability into the work, into projecting that positive energy everywhere they go, and to make sure that Europe can do the same on the international and global scale. I think that this debate just really confirmed that there is the desire, that energy, and I hope that learning the lessons from the past crises, we will cope with this better, and will make sure that Europe will continue to be the role model for others. Thank you.
Bueno, pues ahí quedan esas.
Okay, so both vice presidents are encouraging all the youth to continue to participate and talk and mention how they want the future to be. Mr. Vice President Šefčovič, Mrs. Vice President Ribera, thank you very much for joining us here this morning. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I would like to thank the rest of the speakers. We have 1 year ahead of us regarding the future of Europe conferences, lots to say and do.